welcome to Neo Psychology of me, your teacher, Mr. Neo, the channel where I teach online psychology lessons for my wonderful students. Today we are finishing the last lesson of the attachment unit. We are looking at lesson 12, the influence of early attachment on later relationships. Let's do this. Can your earliest attachments affect your childhood friendships, your relationships in adulthood with romantic partners, or even your relationships in adulthood as a parent? What makes you the person you are in later relationships? That's the question we're looking at today. Last lesson, this is the last lesson of this attachment chapter looks at the consequences of early attachment. One of the key issues in Bowlby's theory of attachment was that early attachments have lifelong consequences. He proposed that the quality of an infant's primary attachment would have a positive correlation with the quality of later attachments. The key to this correlation is the internal working model, which is acquired through interactions with the child's primary attachment figure and then applied to subsequent relationships with friends, boyfriends and girlfriends, long-term partners, and eventually their own children. In this lesson, we will review and expand on this knowledge. So the internal working model is a mental representation of what future relationships will be like. If you have a good internal working model with your parent, you will have good relationships later on. If you have a bad internal working model, you will have bad relationships later on. Now, the major importance of attachment is the ability to form relationships with people other than your primary figure. Today, we look again at Bowlby's idea of the internal working models and at research into link between attachment type and the quality of later relationships. Depending on the attachment type that you would be given, maybe if you did it through the Ainsworth strain situation, we found that that determines the quality of your later relationships. So, we're going to look at three things today. One, our learning objective one, show comprehension and apply knowledge of the internal working model. We looked at this, we're going to look at it in a little bit more detail. Two, we're going to identify and analyze attachment and later relationships. So a key piece of research for that. And then three, to discuss and evaluate influence of early attachment on later relationships. Let's start with learning objective one, show comprehension and apply knowledge of internal working models. In an earlier lesson, we discussed the formation of the internal working model. John Bowlby, 1969, suggested that a child having their first relationship with their primary attachment figure forms a mental representation of this relationship. This internal working model acts as a template for future relationships. The quality of the child's first attachment is crucial because this template will powerfully affect the nature of their future relationships. A child whose first experience is of a loving relationship with a reliable caregiver will tend to assume that this is how relationships are meant to be. They will then seek out functional relationships and behave functionally within them, i.e., without being too uninvolved or being too emotionally closed off, which is more characteristic of someone that's insecure, avoidant, or being controlling and argumentative, which is a characteristic of insecure, resistant. A child with bad experiences of their first attachment will bring these bad experiences to bear on later relationships. This may mean they struggle to form relationships in the first place, or they may not behave appropriately when they have them, displaying this insecure, avoidant and insecure, resistant behavior towards friends and partners. So, we've got internal working models, another key phrase. We looked at it previously. Can you fill it out again? Internal working models. What are they? 2 minutes. Give that a go. As a challenge, can you draw an image to illustrate the key term, or can you summarize the key term into 6 words? Give that a go, and then we're going to go through it now. Internal working models are the mental representations we all carry with us of our attachment to our primary caregiver, right? Our first attachment, our primary caregiver, is a really important attachment because it defines all of our future relationships, because it creates this mental representation or this internal working model of all of our future relationships. They are important in affecting our future relationships because they carry our perception of what relationships are like. Okay, we've got an application question, AO2. Let's apply the knowledge that we have to this scenario. If you can quote parts of the question in your answer, even better. Internal working models in therapy. Some types of psychological therapy make use of internal working models. Gary and Carly have just started relationship counseling. They have been together for a year, but they have frequent rows. Carly feels that Gary is distant and wants to spend a lot of time alone. Gary says he's not used to intimacy. He also objects to Carly wanting to know where he is and starting rows. Gary and Carly have very different relationships with their parents. Gary's mother is always fairly uninvolved and they are not close, whereas Carly reports that her mother is argumentative and controlling. What might the therapist say about Gary and Carly's internal working models? Right? 5 minutes, give it a go, talk about Gary, talk about Carly, talk about the people in the scenario, apply what you've learnt to this scenario. Give that a go now, please. Pause the video and give it a go. Otherwise, let's have a look at the answer. Gary and Carly's therapist might say that their current relationship problems are the result of their internal working models. Both of them are influenced in their relationship behavior by their primary attachments. Gary has brought his history of a distant relationship with his mother to the relationship, whereas Carly's relationship behavior owes more to her argumentative and controlling mother. Okay, what attachment types are Gary and Carly likely to have? Gary shows signs of having an insecure, avoidant attachment because he's quite closed off. Whereas Carly appears to be more insecure, resistant because she's more argumentative and controlling. And they are internal working models. Identify one thing you've learned about internal working models. Why do you think learning about internal working models is important? How does internal working models apply in real life? Who is this information useful to? Who would find this information really useful? Right, that's internal working models. We're a third of the way through already. Huzzah, let's tick it off. Ching. Right, are you ready to move on to the next one? You are. Brilliant. Identify and analyze attachment and later relationships. Let's do this. Attachment types with your primary caregivers can affect your relationships in childhood and in adulthood. In adulthood, this internal working model can affect your relationships with romantic partners and also your relationship with your child as a parent. So, let's have a look at relationship in children. Now remember, in the exam, if they say discuss the influence of early attachment on childhood relationships, you need to talk about this. If it says discuss influence of early attachment on later adult relationships, you need to talk about adults. Listen to the question, it's really specific. Depending on the question, depends on exactly the information they're looking for, okay? This is relationships in childhood, so it's going to be about friendships, okay, about bullying. Attachment type is associated with the quality of peer relationships in childhood. Securely attached infants tend to go on to form the best quality friendships, whereas insecurely attached infants later have friendship difficulties, and that's Kearns in 1994, okay? As one would expect, those children that were found to have a secure attachment found it easy to make friends and had the best quality friendships, whereas those that were insecure, so insecure avoidant or insecure resistant, they were most likely to have friendship difficulties. In particular, bullying behavior can be predicted by attachment type. Myron, Wilson and Smith assessed attachment type and bullying involvement using standard questionnaires in 196 children aged 7 to 11 from London. Secure children are very unlikely to be involved in bullying. Insecure avoidant children were most likely to be victims of bullying, and insecure resistant children were most likely to be the bullies. Okay, so we found the attachment type that you have with your parent did predict later on in life bullying behavior. Incredible. Quick, another application question. Bullying. Jordan has recently been picking on Parisha in school, calling her names and threatening to hit her. Question. How would a developmental psychologist explain this bullying behavior? A developmental psychologist, someone who looks at psychology from this attachment perspective, okay? And then 2, according to Myron Wilson and Smith's research, what attachment type are Jordan and Parisha likely to be? Okay, 2 questions, they don't require a massive answer, 2 minutes, give that a go now please. Write your answer down, don't be lazy, actually write it down in your booklets, give it a go. Let's look at the answer. A developmental psychologist would explain Jordan's bullying behavior as a result of his internal working model. Jordan may have had an insecure relationship with his mother, which has resulted in him developing poor quality childhood relationships. According to Myron Wilson and Smith, Jordan may be more likely to have an insecure resistant attachment type because he's being a bully, whereas Parisha is more likely to have an insecure avoidant attachment type because she's being bullied. Okay. Relationships in adulthood, romantic partners. In a study of attachment, romantic relationships and friendships, Gerard McCarthy studied 40 adult women who had been assessed when they were infants to establish their early attachment types. Right, we've got 40 women and they checked out what attachment types do you have? Are you secure, insecure avoidant, or insecure resistant? Those assessed as securely attached infants had the best adult friendships and romantic relationships, as one would expect. Adults classed as insecure resistant as infants had particular problems maintaining friendships, whilst those classified as insecure avoidant struggled with intimacy in romantic relationships. And that's as you would expect. Remember, those infants that were insecure avoidant, when they were reunited with their caregiver, they avoided them. They didn't necessarily want to build that relationship. They weren't fussed whether their parent came in or out, or whether the stranger came in and out. They had low levels of separation anxiety, low levels of stranger anxiety. So when they became adults, they had problems with intimacy. They can't get close to people. Right, here's a key piece of research. Hazen and Shaver. Now remember, this is Shaver, not Schaefer, as in Schaefer and Emerson, okay? Shaver, there's a difference. Hazen and Shaver, 1987, did a key piece of research. Do I need to remember the name, Mr. Neo? Do I need to remember the year? This one, yes you do. Hazen and Shaver, 1987. Cindy Hazen and Philip Shaver conducted a classic study of the association between attachment type and adult relationships. Here's the procedure. Hazen and Shaver placed the love quiz in the Rocky Mountain News, an American small-town publication. The quiz asked questionnaires about current attachment experiences and about attachment history to identify current and childhood attachment types. The questionnaire also asked questions about attitudes towards love, an assessment of the internal working model. They analysed 620 responses, 205 from men, 415 from women, from a fair cross-section of the population. What do you think Hazen and Shaver's love quiz found? Do you think attachment type will affect later adult relationships with romantic partners? We're going to do this quiz. We're going to do a small snippet of the quiz so you can see what it was about, okay? And that will actually help us analyze it later on. Let's get started with that. Now, there are going to be 9 of these questions, okay? We're going to complete the short version of Hazen and Shaver's love quiz. Note down your answers for each of these questions. There's 9 questions. Questions 1 to 3 is going to be section 1. Questions 4 to 6 is going to be question 2. And questions 7 to 9 is going to be section C, okay? section 3. Okay, so 3 questions in each section. Note your answer down is multiple choice A, B, or C. The answers won't always apply to you, but you got to pick the letter which best fits your scenario. Okay, here we go. Question 1. Which of the following best describes your parents' relationship? A. My parents had a caring relationship and are affectionate with each other. B. My parents appear to have a good enough relationship with each other but are not especially affectionate. C. My parents have a reasonable relationship and are sometimes affectionate towards each other. B. Question 2. Which of the following best describes your relationship with your mother? A. My mother treats me with respect and is accepting and not demanding. She is confident about herself. B. My mother is humorous, likable, and respected by others. She treats me with respect. C. My mother treats me with respect but is sometimes cold and rejecting. Pick the one, A, B, or C. Which one best suits you? Question 3. Which of the following best describes your relationship with your father? A. My father is sometimes affectionate but can be unfair. B. My father is caring, affectionate, and humorous. C. My father is reasonably caring. Question 4. Select the statement that best describes your experiences of intimacy. A. I find that others are reluctant to get as close as I would like. B. I find it relatively easy to get close to others and I'm comfortable depending on them and having them depend on me. C. I am somewhat uncomfortable being close to others. I find it difficult to trust them completely, difficult to allow myself to depend on them. Question 5. Select the statement that best describes your experience of intimacy. A. I don't often worry about being abandoned or about someone getting too close to me. B. I often worry that my partner doesn't really love me or won't want to stay with me. Or C. I am nervous when anyone gets too close and often romantic partners want me to be more intimate than I feel comfortable being. Question 6. Select the statement that best describes your experiences of intimacy. A. I enjoy relationships but I'm generally quite self-sufficient. B. I have been lucky in love and most of my relationships are rewarding. I still like the people I was involved with. C. At times I wish I could just melt into someone so we can get beyond our separateness. Question 7. Select the statement that best describes your attitudes towards love. A. The kind of head over heels love that is depicted in novels and in the movies does not exist in real life. B. It is easy to fall in love and I frequently find myself beginning to fall in love, though I am not sure that it really is love. C. Love is a positive and real experience. Penultimate question, question 8. Select the statement that best describes your attitude towards love. A. It is rare to find a person one can really fall in love with. B. In some relationships, romantic love never fades. C. Most of us could love many people equally well. There is no one true love. And then the final question, question 9. Select the statement that best describes your attitude towards love. A. I think that romantic feelings do wax and wane, meaning they get stronger and weaker. B. Romantic feelings wax and wane, but at times they reach the intensity experienced at the start of a relationship. Or C. Intense romantic love is common at the start of a relationship, but rarely lasts. Okay, now, this is what those answers mean, right? Depending on what you put for each answer, A, B, or C, depending on whether you fit into the secure attachment type, insecure avoidant, and insecure resistant. Now, questions 1 to 3 is part A. What was your dominant score, your dominant category in A? So, for example, if you got 2 secures and 1 insecure resistant in questions 1 to 3, your dominant category would be secure. Okay, if questions 4 to 5 you got 2 avoidant and 1 resistant, your dominant category for that one would be avoidant. Okay, try and work out what you got for each question. What does each one of those, each one of your answers A, B, or C mean? And then can you find out for either section A, questions 1 to 3, section B, questions 4 to 6, and part C, 7 to 9, what was your dominant category? Now, dependent on your dominant category in each one is going to mean this. Okay? What does your score suggest about your early attachment type and the nature of relationship with your primary caregiver? So, in part A, this is looking at memories of the mother-childhood relationship. If you got mostly secure, and you're a secure adult, you have a positive image of the mother and dependable and as dependable and caring. Okay, if you got mostly resistant, we got conflicting memories of the mother being positive and rejecting. If you got mostly avoidant, you remember your mother as cold and rejecting. Part B is adults' views of relationships. If you got mostly secure, you trust others and believe in enduring love. If you got mostly resistant, you fall in love easily but have trouble finding true love. Or if you're mostly avoidant, love is not durable nor necessary for happiness. And then for the last part, section C, different love experiences. If you were secure, you found that love relationships are positive. If you got resistant, you are reoccupied by love. And if you are avoidant, you are fearful of closeness. Okay, so that was a small snippet part of Hazen and Shaver's love quiz. So we can see what it was like. The actual thing had many more questions in it, but we took part in a small scale version of it. Now the findings. When analysing self-report, remember, there are two types of self-report, questionnaires and interviews. So they would ask the participants questions like that, okay? When analysing self-report of attachment history, they found that the prevalence of attachment styles was similar to that found in infancy. 56% were classified as secure, 25% as avoidant, and 19% as resistant. Now you could argue those are similar numbers to what Ainsworth found in her research in the strange situation. The majority were secure, the next most common was the avoidant, and resistant was the least common. And there are similar numbers there. Those reporting secure attachments were the most likely to have good and longer lasting romantic experiences. So if you got mostly secure, well done. You are likely, according to Hazen and Shaver, you are likely to have good, longer-lasting romantic experiences. However, the avoidant respondents tended to reveal jealousy and fear of intimacy. These findings suggest that patterns of attachment behavior are reflected in romantic relationships. Okay? Now finally, relationships in adulthood as a parent. Internal working models also affect the child's ability to parent their own children. People tend to base their parenting style on their internal working models. So attachment types tend to be passed on through generations of a family. So Bailey et al. In 2007 considered the attachment of 99 mothers to their babies and their own mothers. Mother-baby attachment was assessed using the strange situation, and mother-own mother attachments were assessed using an adult attachment interview. So if you're an adult and you haven't done the strange situation when you're a child, you can't do the strange situation now, because if you cry when your parent leaves the room, you're a weird kind of adult, right? So you have to assess their attachment type, just as we done now in that love quiz, through questionnaires, okay? So we got mothers. They assessed the attachment type with their children using the strange situation, and they tested the relationship with their own mother using a quiz. The majority of women had the same attachment classification both to their babies and their own mothers. So if you had a secure attachment with your mother, you're likely to have a secure attachment with your children. If you had an insecure attachment with your mother, you are likely to have an insecure attachment with your children. This is what Bailey et al. Found in 2007. And it's to do with this internal working model, this mental representation. Harlow's research with monkeys also demonstrated a link between poor attachments and later difficulties with parenting. As we saw, those monkeys that were maternally deprived, they were more aggressive, they were less sociable, and they were unskilled at mating. And when they became parents themselves, they would sometimes attack and sometimes kill their own children because they didn't know how to be parents because they never had them. Quintin et al., which showed that the same is true in humans. The lack of an internal working model means that individuals lack a reference point to subsequently form relationships with their own children. Right, last application question. This is the actual last one now. Internal working models in social work. Sarah works in social services, assessing risks to children from parents that have been referred after issues have arisen with the quality of their parenting. She has just received a new case. A neighbor of a family with a 10-year-old girl has complained that the child has been neglected. When Sarah interviews the mother about the family, it emerges that the mother was neglected in her own childhood. Referring to internal working models, explain what Sarah might think about the origins of the alleged neglect. Right, pause it, give it a go. Apply what you've learned to this application question. This is AO2 application. Quote parts of the question in your answer. Pause it, write your answer, give it a go now. Otherwise, here's the answer. Sarah would probably suspect that the mother's history of neglect in her own childhood has left her with an internal working model of neglectful attachment, right? She's created a negative mental representation. This relationship template has informed her relationship with her own daughter, and without realizing it, she has recreated her own experience of being parented. And that's attachment and later relationships, right? Identify one thing you've learned. Why do you think learning about this is important? How does this apply in real life? Who is this information useful to? Okay, and that's attachment and later relationships. We looked at relationships in childhood, in adulthood, in romantic adulthood, and as a parent, okay? Now we're going to evaluate this, okay? Because there's going to be some people out there that go, well, actually, I don't have a particularly good relationship with my parents, but I turned out perfectly fine. And that's obviously going to be the case sometimes. It's not that deterministic, all right? It's not that simple. So let's discuss and evaluate the influence of early attachment on later relationships. What are some of the strengths and limitations of influence of early attachment on later relationships? One limitation is that there's conflicting evidence of internal working models. Not all studies support internal working models. So for example, Zimmerman in 2000 assessed infant attachment type and adolescent attachments to parents. And they found that there was very little relationship between quality of infant and adolescent attachment. There is a problem because it is not what we would expect if internal working models were important in development. So that's conflicting evidence. Put that into a Peel paragraph structure. 2. Most studies have issues with validity. Most studies of attachment to primary caregivers and other significant people do not make use of the strange situation, but assess infant-parent attachment by means of interview or questionnaire, not in infancy, but years later. This creates validity problems. Assessment relies on self-report techniques like interviews or questionnaires to assess the quality of those relationships. Looking back in adulthood at one's early relationship to a primary attachment figure probably lacks validity because it relies on accurate recollections. Now, if you think back to the quiz that we just done, how valid is the data? How genuine was it? I might have answered honestly, other people may have not answered honestly. Maybe people thought they were answering honestly, but their recollections aren't as good, okay? It's really difficult to say that we're getting valid data here, okay? It lacks validity because it's not genuine. It may not be real. We've got social desirability bias here. Some people may be changing their answers to fit what they think is meant to be the right answer. Or maybe people aren't recollecting what actually happened really. Or maybe they don't have a good interpretation of the relationship they have with their mum or dad or intimacy or whatever it is. Okay? Move on to the next one. The influence of early attachment is probabilistic. It doesn't seem very likely that the quality of infant attachments is an influence of later relationships. However, some attachment researchers, including Bowlby, have probably exaggerated the significance of this influence. Anne Clark and Alan Clark describe the influence of infant attachment on later relationships as probabilistic, subject to chance or probability. People are not doomed to always have bad relationships just because they had attachment problems. They just have a greater risk of problems. There is a further issue that by emphasizing this risk, we become too pessimistic about people's futures, right? It's looking at this idea of determinism versus free will, okay? It's quite a deterministic perspective if you're saying if you have bad relationships as a child, you will always have bad relationships as an adult. And that's not necessarily the case. Right. Summarize each evaluative point into exactly 10 words for us, please. Condense them down, right? It needs a higher level of thinking in order to do that, okay? So if I was to do the last one for us, for example, you would say poor internal working models doesn't always mean bad future relationships. There's 10, right? Something like that. And that's the evaluation. I'm happy for us to tick it off, so let's do that. Tick. Plenary, the last plenary of the last lesson of the attachment unit. Multiple choice questions. Which of these is a true statement concerning internal working models? A, they serve as templates for future relationships. B, they are the result of temperament. C, they predict perfectly what sort of relationship people will have. D, they determine social development and are unalterable. A is true. They serve as templates for future relationships. 2. Which attachment type is the most likely to be the victim of bullying? Secure, insecure, avoidant, insecure, resistant, disinhibited. It is insecure, avoidant are most likely to be victims of bullying. Which attachment type is most likely to have a lot of arguments with friends? Securely attached friends, insecure, resistant, insecure, avoidant, disinhibited. It is insecure, resistant because they are the most argumentative, the most controlling. And then finally, which of the following is not an example of the influence of internal working models? A woman who was neglected as a child finds herself neglecting her child. B, a man with a good relationship with his mother finds it easy to have relationships with a woman. C, a couple who had difficult relationships with their parents find it hard to get along. D, a mother who never got along with her own daughter has an excellent relationship with her daughter. The one that contradicts the internal working model is D. How did you do? How many did you get out of 4? Are you an absolute legend? And that is lesson 12, the influence of early attachment on later relationships. There we go. And that's the attachment unit. It wasn't too difficult, was it? Well done. Have you made your notes? Have you answered the questions? Have a look at some past paper questions. Past paper questions, giving it a go without resources, then getting the mark scheme up, getting your resources open, editing your answers in a different colour, making them better. That's the best way to revise. That's the best way I suggest you try and revise. Give that a go. Well done, my neo-psychologist. I'm so proud of you. Great work as always. I hope you had a good, hope you enjoyed the lessons. God bless and peace.
I'm feeling like Will. I feel like a prince. I'm feeling myself. I'm loaded with bills. Cause I wasn't blessed with no Uncle Phil. Don't know how it feels. I wanted to flex. They told me to chill. I'm making a flip. My life is a flick. Now load up the film.